Уважаемые коллеги, давайте, наверное...
Dear colleagues, let's begin, because our session is quite short, but our speakers are very exciting, and I hope our discussion is productive, and we can witness the transportation revolution, the revolution in urban transport. We see some new modes of transport appearing: car sharing, carpooling, electric kick scooters, also bikes on rent in cities where this model was something extraordinary before. And we see a big change in consumers' demand and habits. Some people would like to move from point A to point B as quickly as possible. Some need to comfort, some need to save, some need to spend more time in transport, because experts say that some computers really prefer to spend as much time in transport, to have a bubble of time, because the rhythm of life in cities is so rapid. This is the only way just to read and take rest. So some people take care about their health, and they prefer different modes of transportation. How can we unite all options to enable residents to navigate between all modes of transportation available in the city? And I think many of you were in the situation when you need one application to use car sharing, and you need another application to check the time schedule of buses. So will mobility as a service likely to become an answer to the new situation with the many modalities and the last mile transportation? What can unite all these options? So MaaS is a model. Many of the world cities try to experiment with this model. So, and today we have one of the guests who launched a mobility like this in Madrid, and we also have a renowned expert in mobility as a service, Mr. François Joseph van Oudenhoff, the head of Future of Mobility Lab and partner in Arthur D. Little, a consultancy, a renowned consultancy, and he's also known as being a co-author of Future of Mobility research work, work which focuses on mobility as a service. And our second guest is Sergio Fernández Balaguer, head of Research and Innovation Projects Department in EMT. EMT is representing the public transportation in Madrid. So, François Joseph, could you please tell us about your vision on how the concept of mobility as a service is developing, and what future is ahead of us?
So, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and share some of the insight from R2D Little. At R2D Little, since 2010, we actually launched a Future of Mobility Lab, trying to look into how to shape mobility of the futures, both from a public and a private angle. And one of the key topics, obviously, that we look at is mobility as a service, which is one of the key enablers for the mobility of the future. And first of all, I'd just like to, as an introduction, make a quick definition of mobility as a service, because very often, when we speak about mobility as a service, everyone just think about having an application on their smartphone to go from A to B. This is part of it. This is what we call in intermodal mobility platform. However, mobility as a service is a much more wider concept, which is what is it that we need to do so that we have a sufficiently attractive shared mobility system, and shared mobility is equal to public transport, walking, cycling, and all the new mobility solution. How can we make that sufficiently attractive so that people move from owning individual cars towards using mobility as a service? So mobility as a service is the overall concept of making this happen. This is what you see from a consumer perspective. This is the application that helps you to go from A to B using different modes of transportation in a seamless way, in a dynamic way. But if you go back, you see that actually it's much more than that. In order to make mobility as a service a reality, you need first of all to focus on the integration of physical transportation services. That means that it can only happen if the actual maturity of your mobility system is strong enough. That means you also need to work on infrastructure, as you are currently doing in Moscow, but also more importantly, in the integration of the different transport mode, which is something that you do, for instance, through developing intermodal master plan, and that's the role of the authority to do so. Then, of course, you have your integrated mobility platform, which is a back end and a front end. I will go in more detail on this later on, and you need to have integrations of the different tariffs. And the great thing is that it has benefits for everyone, because at the end of the day, if this paradigm concretize, it will allow you indeed to get a better mobility for consumer. It will allow you to get a better management of mobility for city authorities, because you can optimize the flow. You can optimize your capex, your capital expenditure in infrastructure, for instance. And ultimately, it's also a better place to be for mobility solutions provider. So there's been lots of discussions about, is that good or is that bad? Is there a risk that private players comes in and try to steal the relationship with the customers from the authority? Well, what we can see, at least from existing mobility as a service concept, we must know it's quite embryonic for now, is that the business case for mobility as a service, meaning that you actually take money from the car into mobility as a service, implies actually that public transport is still going to be at the core. And one of the best examples, I will not cite all of them, is WIM. You know, WIM in Helsinki is already in place since a year and a half now. And what we see is amongst the users of WIM, there's been a shift from 48% of the use of public transport in modal split towards 63%. So it is actually working. Now the key question is the adoption, how to make it happen. A little bit of theory before focusing on the key element, which is what is the different business model for mobility as a service. What you see is that you have the user, of course, is a center, and typically you do have two key components, which are the front end, that's the application you have on your mobile that allows you to go from A to B, and the back end, that's all the mechanism, that's the journey planner, that's the ticketing, booking, payment, and all the optimization of the flow. And in the middle of that back end, you have the data lake. That is the database where all the mobility information, both physical as well as the dynamic flows, are actually integrated. And there's lots of discussion about which is the best market model for mobility as a service. I could speak for hours about this, but I only have a few minutes in front of me. But I would just like to share a little bit of an overview about those three models. I mean, initially, there's been a lot of discussion about the public needs to own everything and needs to be the owner of mobility as a service. And the first model has been developed in Hanover, in Dubai, in some of the cities in France, where actually it was the public entity, the public authority, which was managing everything, and it was based on closed data. So there was a starting up of a MaaS by the public authority of the public transport operator, and there was no open data of public transport. This model actually is a bit difficult to put in place because it doesn't trigger innovation. Then there's another model, which is the aggregated liberal mass market, which is based on full open data. And you consider that anyone can start, they can get access to public transport data, they can develop their mass platform, and on that basis, there will be a good competition between the different actors. This is the model that has been developed, for instance, in London with Citymapper, or in Helsinki with WIM. Now there is an evolution towards a new model, which was introduced in Vienna a few years ago with the upstream platform. They won actually a prize a few years ago at the UITP. They had the SMILE platform, which was the gymnasium of this upstream platform. But now there is a further trend, so Paris, Brussels, Hamburg, and actually the EMTA, which is representing 18 PTAs in Europe, as going also into that direction, towards a new model, which is very virtuous, which is that the authority are going to develop a backend they will manage all the mobility data into one single data lake at city level or at country level, and they will let this backend open so that any public or private players can develop their own front end. So this is the model of the future, which allows actually to keep the data managed at one single place, managed by the public, which allows actually to optimize the mobility flow in the interest of everyone. So optimizing mobility for the city, for the well-being of everyone in the city, and at the same time allowing for different actors, private and public, to compete and to drive innovation in mobility. And so I only had a few minutes, so this is already, I think, my last slide, if I'm not mistaken. But there is a key question, which is what is the role of cities in mobility as a service, but also in more general in terms of all these new mobility. You spoke about car sharing, bike sharing, micro-mobility. And I think that it is very critical to mention that cities have a strong role to play, and there is to be regulation if we want actually to manage mobility of the future. And the first element that needs to be defined is which is the market model that you want to focus on. Because if you are doing pure open data policy, then you will end up into the middle model, and you will not have mobility into your control. If you decide to close the data, then you will end up in the first model. And if you want to have an active role while allowing innovation in the city, you need to act right now. And that means, for instance, there is the ITS directive at European level and the national access point, which is the way that data is to be shared with regards to mobility. The way that each member state is going to define how it will implement the ITS directive is going to influence what the mass market model will look like in the future. And then one final word is that next to regulating, it is also the role of city to enable new mobility. And enabling new mobility means investing into infrastructure, as you do in Moscow right now, to make sure that everything is in place, so that if we want this mobility as a service concept to realize itself, we make a shared mobility system sufficiently attractive so to be able to compete with the individual car and to bring maximum superior customer excellence, customer experience to everyone. That is it for today. I'll be very happy to discuss further. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Я думаю, что мы еще...
Thank you very much. I think we are going to ask Francois just another words. I would like to give the floor to Sergio Fernández Balaguer. I've said already that many cities are actively engaged, not only experimenting with MaaS model. In Madrid, particularly last June, saw the start of a new application, which is called MaaS. Sergio, please tell us the model offered by Francois Joseph your application is operating, and how far are you in terms of integration of different modes of transport which are in abundance in Madrid?
I wrote some words first in Russian, just Доброе утро.
Good morning, and thank you very much for this invitation.
I'm really happy about the words from Francois Joseph, because I fully agree with that vision. So now I would like to give you in some minutes our vision in Madrid about mobility as a service. So, well, you know already, Madrid is a big city, and as many cities, we share the same challenges. We are the capital of the country, 3.2 million inhabitants in the metropolitan area, up to more than 5 million. The main airport in the country, the fifth in Europe, more than 10 million visitors per year and growing a lot every year. This year, so far, it's 30% more. It's the main hub in the country with about 12% of the total GDP of the country. So we face many challenges. And in terms of transport, I'm very happy, and I put this slide because this study was presented less than 1 month ago here in Moscow at the first summit on transport leaders, and a McKinsey company showed this study with 24 global cities, and Madrid is the fifth one in overall urban mobility, but when we get into public transport, we rank the sixth. And that's quite important because Madrid is well known for its public transport network. The total demand per year is about 1,600 million passengers. We have, I think, the 8th biggest metro network, subway network, and it's working well. Within the city center, for instance, 41% of the modal split is for public transport, then 33% walking and cycling, and then the rest is private car use. But it's all about evolution, so the cities change with time. This is a picture of Plaza Mayor, the main square in the old city center. It was used for just events in the 16th century, then in the 19th it became a park with trees. In the 60s it became a car park, as in many cities happened. And now it's back to citizens as a leisure place. So we need to focus on that because within this evolution, all the challenges we have, we need to adapt to them. So in terms of air quality, in Madrid we have a problem, especially in winter. So 81% of the rolling stock are private cars. And more than half of the total emissions in NOx and particle matters comes from road traffic, whereas greenhouse gas emissions is about 36%. But also congestion. In Madrid there are registered 1.72 million cars, more than 1 additional million cars enter the city. That generates also a conflict in terms of efficiency of public transport, road public transport, so the buses get stuck in the traffic. Also about how to give space, public space, to the most sustainable means of transport, such as walking, or the competition for public space when thinking about parking, for instance, motorbikes. So it's really a problem. And now shared mobility came to the city first in 2015, and 2018 was really like the boom, a great boom, because at the moment Madrid is one of the cities in Europe with the highest number of electric mobility shared services. We have 5 e-car sharing companies, 6 e-motor sharing companies, 19 kick e-scooters companies with more than 8,000 kick e-scooters. We have also bike sharing, both station-based and free-floating. In terms of electric cars, more than 2,400, and in terms of electric motorbikes, more than 4,500. And as I mentioned more recently, the kick e-scooters. So we want shared mobility to be part of the solution, but always keeping in mind that mass public transport must remain as the backbone. And that's why we decided to try to do something about it and develop our own mobility as a service initiative. Because the point is to move people, not to move iron and vehicles across the city. So a big help has been how to turn or change the regulatory framework of the city. The Plan A, Air Quality and Climate Change Plan, developed and approved in September 2017, gave a lot of tools for that. The 21 out of 30 measures are mobility related, and the 21st measure is about the promotion of shared mobility and mobility as a service schemes. And also the new Sustainable Mobility Ordinance that was approved last October sets the rules for all these new shared mobility services and micro-mobility services. So why EMT? EMT Madrid, we are the public transport company. We are fully owned by the city. We are actually a multimodal operator because we manage the urban bus network, the underground parking facilities with more than 23 parking facilities and 11 parking lots, providing also charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. We manage the e-bike sharing system with more than 2,400 pedelecs. We also manage the cable car in the city. So we offer trustworthiness and impartiality for our clients right now. We have more than 70 years history, and we are offering this simplicity and flexibility through MaaS Madrid. So why? Because technology is already there. And if we use it accordingly, we can provide the best service. So at this point, governance is key. That could be one of the main measures and messages. We need to be sure that we offer equal competition among all the mobility providers, but always keeping in mind basic rules, such as impartiality, trust, transparency, data sharing, trading agreements, digitalization of transport tickets, and putting this on a most simplest way, always thinking that we must help the city to accomplish city goals. Why? Well, we thought at the beginning that MaaS would be not only just making things simpler for the user. That's by the way, the icon of our initiative. It's about making it simpler. It's about making a better experience. It's about improving information. It's also about satisfying demand, sustainability, and multimodality. And the main topic and the main ultimate goal for us is to turn users into real multimodal users, especially if we are able to provide accurate timing and price, because those factors are the ones that drives most of the time our choice towards private car. Whenever we don't know, oh, am I arriving on time to my meeting or whatever, or would it be very expensive, you shift to your car. It's as simple as that. So if we are able to fulfill those two main requirements, then we think that would succeed. And the debate would be, should we be active role of this game, public sector, or should we lead the private initiative for everything? And we think we should be an active part. Cities must be an active part, and I fully agree with what Francois Joseph said, because many times, I mean, cities need to look after some aspects which most of the times are not market-driven, such as sustainability, equity, inclusiveness. So we need to really think about that and help to achieve city goals. So we think there is really a role to play in this field. So regarding MaaS Madrid, our initiative, it's a mixed model. So according to the last UATP report that was launched last April, we would fit right now between the Model 2 and Model 3, that was also pointed out by Francois Joseph. So we are in between this open market with different platforms and that public back-end gathering data and then setting the rules for the rest of the mobility providers. I think our ultimate goal would be to shift towards this third model, but probably the situation at the moment in Madrid is not that mature. That's why we are in this in-between status. And this is currently the situation. So this is how it looks like. It's kind of a diagram. So we have already developed what we call identity manager, so how people can access to the platform. For instance, if you don't have a driving license, then you will not be able to access car sharing services, for instance. Also the payment manager, including the post-paid capabilities. That means we are at the moment able to see which are the number of trips you're doing, and then offering you at the very end of the day the best fare according to your mobility pattern. And also the modeling tools to analyze data. That's fully developed. We have also integrated all the information coming from all mobility providers. And at this point, I must say that it hasn't been that difficult as we expected, maybe because we are a public company. And private mobility operators know that we are not business-driven. Like, we don't really intend to get a revenue out of this, but help city to achieve the goals in terms of more sustainable mobility. And now, ongoing, we are working on the route planner, which is scheduled right after summer in September, and also some other components in which mobility manager is one of the key ones, because that will let us know the mobility behavior of the user. And that is really relevant because it allows to better plan the transport offer and to better adjust and give the best tailor-made suggestion of the trip for the user according to their preferences. At this point, I think user trust is basic and fundamental. Users must be aware that the data generated by them will be used just for improving the service and not to bother them with intrusive behavior. So everything about data protection, privacy, it's one of the key aspects, no matter if they accept to be tracked for some time, just to get information and be able to better adapt the transport offer. But user trust is fundamental. And it's linked with this two main key expectations from users, which were also pointed out in this UITP report: trustworthiness and impartiality. So this is just a real screenshot, how it looks like. And as I mentioned, phase 1 is fully accomplished, and now we are in phase 2. So hopefully after summer, it will be possible for you to go to Madrid and use it. It is already available in Android and iOS, the phase 1. And last but not least, cooperation. That helps. So these are just 3 examples of European-funded projects in which we are involved to move forward mobility as a service, and also knowledge exchange through different platforms and alliances such as MaaS Alliance. So that's it. Thank you. Спасибо.
Спасибо большое, Серхио.
Thank you, Sergio, very much. And the question which I'd like to ask to our boss guests: how far should the integration of the services within MaaS be to fully reveal the potential of mobility as a service? More often in those applications which exist, we see the model of pay-as-you-go. So you pay for every trip. Are we going to have a flat rate as a single card? How the far integration can go? Francois, the floor is yours.
If the key question is that in which types, what do we need to have a business case? And if you want to have a business case for mobility as a service, the only way is to actually be able to take some of the money that is being used for individual cars to actually go into mobility as a service. So in my view, the pay-as-you-go model, as you just described, this is an intermediary step. This will still continue to exist, obviously, but there is no business case with that. It just improves the convenience, but it won't change the behavior of people. And so ultimately, if we really want to realize the MaaS concept, we need to go into this subscription model, where actually you pay indeed a certain amount per month, which is predictable. I liked what you were saying about predictability of timing, but that also is true for the amount you're going to spend. So if you know that you will pay, I don't know, 400 euro per month, and you will have access to all mobility, including a Tesla for the weekend. It's not only about public transport, it's all mobility. That you have a service that answers fully to all your needs and give you predictability, both in terms of budget, as well as in terms of the timing that you will need for all your moves, then the concept will realize. As soon as we stay in the pay-as-you-go, we will not be able to change behavior towards a change of mobility pattern.
Sergio, how far the integration could go?
Well, I agree with the vision that Francois Joseph said, though our initial aim is not getting to this kind of bundling and full package, though we doesn't refuse to it. It's just that we are not that in that step. So I think the main message I would like to give is that the goal is to get people out of their cars. And something which is very important, and I didn't mention here, is that our initiative is so far city-driven. But to make it fully functional, it should be regional or even beyond-driven. That means that there is the need of full cooperation between the different administrations that have competences in mobility. That's fundamental. Because when we think about cities, most of the times, cities have a enoughly dense network of public transport and enough offer of mobility choices. But the main challenge is in the communications between the city and the metropolitan area, mostly. So commuting, that is what is really not well resolved yet. In those areas, public transport is not efficient enough against private car use. So that's why we need stable regulatory frameworks and fluent cooperation between different administrations. So ideally, it would be something maybe driven by the regional governments or even national governments.
Спасибо большое. Как раз интересно, сегодняшний опыт показал, что
Very interesting. Our today's experience showed that the mobility as a service model is being implemented much faster in Europe with traditional structures. Sadly, we need to finish, and we had Sergio Fernández Balaguer, head of the Center of Innovations in EMT Madrid, who told us about MaaS application. Please feel free to download it when you are in Madrid. And also Francois Joseph van Oudenhoff, the head of Future of Mobility Lab and partner of Arthur D. Little. And my name is Elena Novikova. I'm head of the Department of IT Technologies in the city of Moscow. Welcome to the next session of Urban Forum.